The morning air in Clarksville, Tennessee, carried the kind of quiet that only small towns know. The sort of silence that isn't empty, but full, packed with the sounds of roosters 3 streets over, a screen door creaking somewhere down the road, and the low hum of a refrigerator that had been running since 1987 and refused to quit. It was the first week of October, and the maple trees lining Birchwood Avenue had already begun their slow surrender to autumn, their leaves turning the color of rust and burnt honey, drifting down in lazy spirals onto cracked sidewalks and old pickup trucks that hadn't moved in years. Caleb Harrington was awake before his grandmother. He was always awake before her now. That was something that had changed over the past few months, though he couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was because he'd started noticing things. Little things. The kind adults think children never see. The way Dorothy moved slower in the mornings, gripping the back of a chair before she stood up straight. The way she'd sometimes stop in the middle of washing dishes and stare out the window at nothing, her hands still submerged in soapy water, a dish forgotten in her grip. The way the kitchen cabinet, which used to have 3 different kinds of cereal and a tin of Danish butter cookies she kept for guests, now held only a near-empty box of oatmeal and a can of soup with a dented lid. Caleb was 11 years old. He wasn't supposed to notice these things, but he did. He sat at the edge of his bed in the pale gray light of early morning, wearing an oversized Tennessee Volunteers t-shirt that came down to his knees and a pair of mismatched socks. One white, one gray, with a small hole near the left big toe. His room was small and smelled of cedar and old books. A wooden bookshelf his grandfather, Earl Harrington, had built by hand stood against the far wall, filled with paperback adventure novels, 3 football trophies from school, a coffee mug holding an assortment of colored pencils, and 1 framed photograph. The photograph. It sat on the second shelf, slightly off-center because Caleb had nudged it that way years ago so that it caught the light from the window in the afternoon. It was a 5x7 print, its edges softened by time, its colors faded to pastels, pinks gone dusty, whites turned cream, blues leached into silver gray. But even faded, you could make out everything that mattered. A young woman, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair pulled back loosely and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She was smiling in the photograph. A wide, unguarded smile. The kind that doesn't know it's being photographed. The kind that belongs only to the person feeling it. She was holding a cake. A simple, round, white frosted cake on a blue ceramic stand, with a single white candle at the center, already lit. The tiny flame captured mid-flicker by whoever had pressed the shutter. The cake looked homemade, imperfect. The frosting was slightly uneven on one side, thicker on the left than the right, and there were small ridges where someone had dragged a spatula without enough patience. There were no decorations, no sprinkles, no piped flowers or candy letters, just white frosting and 1 candle. To any other child, it would have been unremarkable. To Caleb, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Her name had been Lynette Harrington. Lynette Ann Harrington, née Caldwell. She had grown up in Nashville, met Derek Harrington at a county fair when she was 19, married him at 21, and died 11 days after Caleb was born, from complications that the doctor had explained to Dorothy in medical language that Dorothy had never repeated to anyone, preferring instead to say only, "She gave everything she had to bring him into this world." Caleb had no memories of her, not a single one. He had been 11 days old when she died. 11 days of feeding and warmth and the sound of her heartbeat, all of which lived somewhere too deep in his body to ever become a conscious thought. What he had instead was the photograph, and what he had decided, somewhere around age 7, was that the cake in the photograph was a birthday cake. His birthday cake, from his very first birthday, even though he knew rationally that he hadn't been born yet when the photo was taken. He knew. He'd asked Dorothy about it once, carefully, the way children ask questions they're not sure they want answered. "Grandma, when was this picture taken?" Dorothy had looked at it for a long time before answering. "That was taken at your mama's 22nd birthday, baby. About a year before you were born." He'd nodded. He'd said, "Okay." And then he'd carried the photograph back to his room and set it on the shelf and decided that it didn't matter. The woman in the photo was his mother. The cake was white with one candle. And every year on his birthday, October 14th, he asked his grandmother for the same thing. Not a video game, not new sneakers, not a party or a gift card or anything from the list his teacher gave out at the beginning of the school year titled Things Kids Want. Just the cake. The white cake with white frosting and one candle. Same as hers, he always said. The one in the picture. And every year, Dorothy made it. She'd pull out her old mixing bowls, the ones with the blue stripe around the rim that had belonged to her own mother, and she'd measure out the flour and sugar by memory, humming old hymns under her breath, while the oven preheated and the kitchen filled with that particular warmth that only baking can produce. A warmth that was different from the heating system or even from sunlight, something closer to intentional, something that felt like care made physical. But this year was different. Caleb could feel it the way you feel weather changing, not by looking at the sky, but by the pressure in your chest, some animal part of you that registers shifts before your mind catches up. He stood from his bed and padded down the hallway in his mismatched socks, past the bathroom where the hot water heater knocked every morning at 5:45, past the door to Dorothy's room where he could hear her breathing, slow and slightly labored, the way it had been since she'd gotten that cold in August that never quite went away, and into the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. A half-gallon of milk, maybe a quarter full. 3 eggs, a block of cheddar cheese, leftover rice in a Tupperware container, a stick of butter, most of it used. On the counter, the ceramic fruit bowl that was supposed to hold apples or oranges held instead 2 bananas past their prime and a handful of loose change, quarters and dimes and a few pennies, the kind of money that accumulates at the bottom of a purse and ends up in a bowl because there's nowhere else to put it. Caleb counted the change without meaning to. It was a habit he'd developed lately. 87 cents. He put the change back carefully, the way he'd found it, and poured himself a glass of the remaining milk, and stood at the kitchen window, drinking it slowly, watching the maple tree in the backyard drop a single red leaf that turned 3 slow somersaults before catching on the fence post. His birthday was 13 days away. He didn't say anything to Dorothy about the cake. He had decided, sometime in the night, that he wouldn't. That this year, he would simply not ask. He would let the day come and go, and he would say that what he wanted was just to spend the day at home, watching football with her, maybe having soup. He was 11 years old. He was old enough to protect her from one small sadness. He rinsed his glass and set it in the drying rack. He didn't know yet that the town had other plans. Clarksville, Tennessee, had a population of just under 160,000, which made it technically a city by census standards, but in its soul it was still a town. The kind of place where people knew the name of their mail carrier and left casseroles on the porches of sick neighbors without being asked. It sat about an hour northwest of Nashville, straddling the Cumberland River, flat-earthed and sprawling, with pockets of old rural character tucked between the new subdivisions and the chain restaurants that had appeared along Highway 41A like mushrooms after rain. The neighborhood where Dorothy Harrington lived, where Caleb had lived his entire life, was called Woodfield, and it was the kind of neighborhood that used to be the good side of town, and was now just the old side of town, where houses had good bones and needed paint, where retired couples sat on porches in the evenings, and where children still played in the street until the streetlights came on. The houses were mostly brick, single-story, built in the 1960s and 1970s, with big yards and detached garages, and the occasional ambitious garden that somebody's wife had started and somebody's grandchild was now trying to maintain. Dorothy's house at 412 Birchwood Avenue had yellow shutters that had once been bright and were now the color of old newspaper, a porch swing that groaned under any weight above 140 pounds, and a vegetable garden in the back that had given up on tomatoes 2 summers ago but still produced stubborn green beans every July without fail. Earl Harrington had bought the house in 1979 for $48,000 and considered it the greatest achievement of his life. He'd worked 31 years at the Fort Campbell installation, first as a civilian mechanic and then as a facilities manager. And when he retired, he'd spent his weekends fixing everything in the house that needed fixing and a few things that didn't. He'd died of a heart attack 4 years ago, in February, while shoveling snow from the front walk. And Dorothy had found him there an hour later, the shovel still in his hand, the path neatly cleared to the mailbox. She hadn't touched the snow shovel since. She paid the neighbor's teenage son, Tyler Bowman, $10 to do it each time. But this past winter, there hadn't been money for Tyler. There hadn't been money for a lot of things. Earl's pension covered most of the mortgage, but most wasn't all. And the gap between those two words had grown wider since his death, filling slowly with small disasters. A hot water heater that needed replacing, a car transmission that cost more to fix than the car was worth, a root canal that insurance covered 60% of, and a prescription for Dorothy's blood pressure that had gone up in price 3 times in 2 years. Each of these things alone was survivable. Together, stacked and accumulated, they had quietly hollowed out the savings account until what remained wouldn't fill a coffee mug. Dorothy hadn't told Caleb any of this. She'd been raised in a generation that didn't discuss money with children, or with most adults, for that matter. Financial hardship was something you endured quietly and privately, the way you endured grief or embarrassment, presenting a steady face to the world while you sorted it out behind closed doors. But Caleb was sorting it out anyway, with his child's eyes and his child's mathematics. The full fruit bowl and the empty one, the 3 kinds of cereal and the 1 box of oatmeal, the change in the ceramic dish. He was sorting it out, and he was making decisions based on what he found. The school bus for Rossview Middle School picked Caleb up at 7:15 on the corner of Birchwood and Elm, and on this particular Tuesday morning in early October, he arrived at the stop just as his friend Owen Calloway came jogging up from the opposite direction, backpack bouncing, shoelaces half-tied, a granola bar in his fist. Owen Calloway was 12, a year older than Caleb, with freckles so dense they'd nearly merged into a single tan and hair the color of a retriever's coat. He was loud and generous and entirely without self-consciousness, the kind of kid who would eat lunch with anyone and genuinely not understand why some people wouldn't. He and Caleb had been friends since 2nd grade, bonded initially by the fact that they'd both gotten their feet stuck in the same muddy patch of the school's back field during a physical education class and had needed each other's help to get out. "Yo," Owen said, arriving at the corner slightly out of breath. He took a bite of the granola bar without breaking stride. "Did you see the thing on the county fair board? They're saying Alan Jackson might do a show at the fairgrounds next week." Caleb looked at him. "Alan Jackson?" "Yeah, man. Country singer. My dad listens to him like every Saturday morning. Chattahoochee, where were you? All that stuff. Why would Alan Jackson do a show in Clarksville? Owen shrugged. My dad said he was doing some kind of small-town tour thing. Like, not the big arenas, just small venues, county fairs, stuff like that. He finished the granola bar and stuffed the wrapper in his jacket pocket. Probably won't even happen. You know how the county fair board is. They announced Dolly Parton was coming in 2019, and it was literally just a Dolly Parton tribute band. Caleb smiled faintly at that. Yeah. The bus appeared at the end of the road, its yellow shape rounding the corner with the slow certainty of something very large and very committed to its route. Your birthday's coming up, Owen said, with the directness that was entirely his own. What do you want this year? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Same thing I always want, he said. Owen nodded. He'd heard about the cake. He'd never made a big deal of it, which was one of the reasons Caleb liked him. You think your grandma's gonna make it? The bus pulled up with a hydraulic hiss, and the doors folded open. I don't know, Caleb said honestly, and stepped up into the bus. The school day passed in the way school days do when your mind is elsewhere. A series of moments you're present for, physically but not quite fully. The teacher's voice arriving slightly muffled. The words on the page taking a beat longer to resolve into meaning. Caleb sat through pre-algebra and English language arts, and a social studies quiz on the geography of the American Southwest. And at lunch, he ate a turkey sandwich that Dorothy had packed in a brown paper bag, along with an apple and 3 shortbread cookies in a small Ziploc bag. And he thought about the photograph on the shelf. He thought about the way his mother's eyes crinkled in the corners when she smiled. He wondered if his eyes did that too. He'd looked in the mirror for it before, trying to manufacture the same expression. But it wasn't something you could manufacture. It either happened or it didn't. His friend Priya Kellerman sat down across from him with her lunch tray and immediately began complaining about the social studies quiz. The Colorado River runs through how many states? Like, I'm supposed to just know that? She stabbed a forkful of green beans with dramatic emphasis. 7 states. 7. Who has time for 7 states? It's on the study guide, Caleb said. The study guide, Priya repeated, as though he'd said something faintly ridiculous. Caleb, I have dance on Tuesdays, soccer on Wednesdays, and my mom started making me do this mindfulness app for 30 minutes every night. So when exactly am I supposed to be studying the Colorado River? Caleb smiled for the first time all day. That was the thing about Priya. She had a way of arriving in a conversation like a small weather event and rearranging everything around her without meaning to. How's your grandma? She asked, pivoting without warning, because that was also a thing about Priya. She's okay, Caleb said. Priya looked at him for a moment with the particular expressiveness of someone who has grown up in a household where feelings are discussed openly and at length. You sure? Yeah, he said. She's okay. He ate his apple and didn't say anything else, and Priya, to her credit, let it go. He got home at 3:45 to find Dorothy asleep in her armchair in the living room, a partially completed crossword puzzle in her lap, the television on low, tuned to a channel showing afternoon court shows. The curtains were drawn against the afternoon sun, and the room had that warm, dusty amber quality of a place where time had slowed down and settled. Caleb stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe. She was 68 years old, but lately she looked older. Not ancient, not fragile in the breakable sense, but worn. The way things get worn when they've been used faithfully and continuously for decades. Her hands, resting on the arms of the chair, were the hands of someone who had cooked and cleaned and gardened and held and built things, mapped with veins and freckled with age spots, and slightly swollen at the knuckles from the arthritis, she mentioned, only when it was very bad. Her hair was white and cut short, and she wore it combed back from her face. And even asleep, there was something in her expression that was organized, resolved, as though she'd made peace with everything, and the peace held even in sleep. Caleb set his backpack down quietly and went to the kitchen. There was a bill on the counter. He didn't read it. He had a policy about that. A self-imposed rule that he'd created around age 9 when he'd accidentally read a medical bill and hadn't understood most of it, but had understood the total at the bottom. But he saw the red stripe across the top that meant second notice, and he felt the familiar drop in his stomach. He opened the cabinet and took out the box of oatmeal. He made himself a bowl, standing at the stove, and ate it without sitting down, looking out the kitchen window at the maple tree. 13 days until his birthday. He made a decision quietly, the way he made most of his decisions, not dramatically, not with a speech or a conscious declaration, but with a simple internal closing of a door. He wouldn't ask for the cake this year. He wouldn't mention it at all. He rinsed the bowl and went to start his homework. From the living room came the sound of Dorothy stirring, the rustle of the crossword puzzle, the soft clearing of her throat. "Caleb? That you, baby?" "Yes, ma'am," he called back. "Good day?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good day." A pause. Then, "I'll start dinner in a little while. How does chicken soup sound?" "Sounds great," he said. And it did. It genuinely did. Because she was still there, still making soup, still calling him baby in that voice that had been the first sound he'd ever trusted. Whatever else was true, that was true. He sat down at his desk and opened his math textbook and got to work. The rumor about Alan Jackson turned out not to be a rumor. By Thursday of that week, the announcement was up on the official Montgomery County Fair website, shared 1,700 times on the county's Facebook community group, and referenced in a brief article in the Leaf Chronicle, Clarksville's local paper. Under the headline, "Country Legend Alan Jackson to Headline Intimate Clarksville Show as Part of Small Town America Tour." The article explained that Jackson, who had been largely out of the major touring circuit for several years due to a diagnosis of Charcot-Marie tooth disease, a progressive nerve condition that affected his balance, had decided to undertake a series of smaller, community-focused concerts across rural and small-town America. The tour was billed not as a commercial venture, but as something closer to a homecoming, a return to the kinds of places and the kinds of people that country music had always been about. Tickets were free. The show was open to the public. It would be held on the fairgrounds on the evening of October 13th. October 13th, the day before Caleb's birthday. Owen texted him the article at 7 in the morning on Friday, with 17 exclamation points, and the message, "I told you it was real." Caleb read the article twice on his phone, sitting on the edge of his bed in his mismatched socks. The photograph of his mother watching from the shelf. He wasn't particularly a country music fan. He was 11, and his musical preferences ran more toward whatever Priya put on when they did homework together, which was a mix of pop and R&B and songs from animated movies she insisted were underrated. But there was something about the date that caught in his mind like a splinter, small and persistent. October 13th, the night before his birthday, in his town. He didn't know what to do with that. So he did what he usually did with things he didn't know what to do with. He filed it away and went about his day. Dorothy found out about the concert from Marvella Hutchins, her neighbor from 3 houses down, who appeared at the front door on Friday afternoon with a foil-covered plate of lemon bars and the entire article printed out in large font, because she'd learned that Dorothy preferred reading things on paper. Marvella Hutchins was 71, a retired school librarian with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain around her neck. and she was the closest thing Dorothy had to a best friend since Earl died. They had known each other for 26 years, had weathered grandchildren's births and spouses' deaths, and one shared flooded basement during a particularly aggressive spring storm. And the ease between them was the kind that required no maintenance, only occasional presence. "Free concert," Marvella said, setting the lemon bars on the kitchen table and settling herself into the chair across from Dorothy. "Free. Right here in Clarksville. Alan Jackson, Dorothy." Earl loved Alan Jackson. "I know he did," Dorothy said, unwrapping the foil from the plate. "Remember When" was his song. You know that. "I know that, Marvella. You should take the boy." Dorothy was quiet for a moment, breaking a lemon bar in half. "Caleb's not much for country music." "Caleb is 11 years old and hasn't been anywhere in 4 months," Marvella said, with the gentle directness that was her particular gift. "Take the boy to the concert. It's free. It's the night before his birthday. It'll do you both good." Dorothy looked down at the lemon bar in her hands. She knew what Marvella wasn't saying. Marvella knew about the finances, not the exact numbers, but the shape of the situation. The way a person who has known you for 26 years can read the shape of a hardship even when you haven't given them the details. Marvella knew that Dorothy hadn't replaced the hot water heater because she was putting it off, and that she was putting it off because of the number. She knew that the prescription had been refilled in half doses last month. She knew about the second notice bill because she'd seen it on the counter when she'd stopped by to drop off green beans from her garden. She was offering the concert not as an entertainment, but as an act of mercy. Here is something free. Here is something real. Here is something you can give him that won't cost you what you don't have. "I'll mention it to him," Dorothy said. Marvella nodded, satisfied, and reached for a lemon bar of her own. Caleb's reaction, when Dorothy mentioned the concert at dinner that evening, was not the enthusiastic response she'd perhaps expected. He looked up from his bowl of chicken soup and said, "Yeah, Owen said something about that. Would you want to go? It's the night before your birthday." He shrugged, the way 11-year-olds shrug. A full-body thing, both shoulders, eyes briefly to the ceiling. "Sure, I guess, if you want to." "I'm asking if you want to." He looked at her for a moment. She was sitting across the table from him, and the kitchen light was on, and she looked tired but present, the way she looked most evenings. The day's tiredness settled around her eyes, but her attention fully on him. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'd like that." She smiled. "Good, we'll go together." He went back to his soup, and she went back to hers. And neither of them mentioned the birthday cake. And the thing that wasn't said sat between them at the table with the patience of something that has no deadline. The next 10 days passed in the unhurried rhythm of a place that doesn't rush because it never learned how to. Caleb went to school and came home and did his homework, and watched football with Dorothy on Sunday afternoons, their sides touching on the old couch, a bowl of popcorn on the cushion between them. He helped Marvella rake the leaves from her front yard on Saturday morning, and she paid him $12, which he brought home and set on the kitchen counter next to the ceramic bowl without a word. And Dorothy looked at it for a moment, and then looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and a complicated grief, and said, "Thank you, baby." And he said, "The leaves were getting crazy over there." And that was all either of them needed. Owen came over on Wednesday afternoon, and they played video games in Caleb's room, and Owen asked if he was excited about his birthday, and Caleb said, "Sure." And Owen accepted this in the way Owen accepted most things, which was without friction. Priya texted him on Thursday to ask if he was going to the Alan Jackson concert, and he said yes. And she sent back a string of cowboy hat emojis and a voice message of herself attempting to sing Chattahoochee, which was terrible. and genuinely funny, and he played it 3 times. He thought about the cake exactly once, on the night of October 10th, lying in bed in the dark. He thought about it directly and completely, let himself feel the full weight of it, the specific ache of wanting something small that had enormous meaning, the particular loneliness of a grief that no one else quite shared. And then he let it go, set it aside, closed the door. He was 11. He was old enough. He turned over and went to sleep. Dorothy, meanwhile, was doing her own private mathematics. She sat at the kitchen table on the night of October 10th after Caleb had gone to bed, with the household notebook she kept, spiral-bound, blue cover, pages warped from years of use, open in front of her, and a pen in her hand and the overhead light on, because the reading glasses didn't help as much as they used to. She had $214 in the checking account. The power bill was due on the 17th, which was $108. The mortgage auto payment went out on the 1st of November, which was still 3 weeks away. But the small surplus she usually kept as a buffer was gone. The prescription refill was due at the end of the month, $62 even with insurance. 214 minus 108 was 106. Minus 62 was 44. $44 was what remained. And that was before groceries for the next 2 weeks. She closed the notebook. She sat for a while in the quiet kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum. The same refrigerator that had been running since 1987, still going, still faithfully doing its one job. She thought about the cake. Every year since Caleb was 4 years old, she had made that cake. A basic white cake from scratch, flour, sugar, butter, eggs, vanilla, buttermilk, with a simple white buttercream frosting. It wasn't expensive. The ingredients cost maybe $8 or $9 if she already had the staples. And she usually did. This year, she didn't. The butter was nearly gone. The sugar canister was less than a quarter full. She was out of vanilla. The baking powder was probably expired. She'd need to buy all of it. And $8 or $9 this month was the difference between the grocery budget working and not working. She sat with that for a long time. She thought about Caleb's face every year when she put the cake in front of him. Not the explosive delight of a child getting what they want. Nothing so simple as that. It was something quieter and deeper. The way he looked at the cake before he blew out the candle. The way he sometimes touched the frosting lightly with one finger before cutting it, as though confirming its reality. The way he'd once said, when he was 7, "It looks exactly the same, Grandma. Exactly like hers." She pressed her hands flat on the table. She picked up her pen. In the notebook, on a blank line at the bottom of the page, she wrote, "Cake. Find a way." She underlined it twice. Then she closed the notebook, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. She didn't find a way. Not in the first 3 days. She looked at the notebook entry each morning with the same determination and went to bed each night with the same problem unsolved. She considered asking Marvella, but the thought of it, of naming the specific amount, the specific lack, the specific cake for the specific dead daughter-in-law whose memory she was trying to honor, was more than she could bring herself to do. Some things were too tender to be spoken out loud to even the closest friend. She considered calling Derek, Caleb's father. She dismissed the thought almost immediately. Derek was in Murfreesboro, working at a distribution warehouse, living with a woman named Carla and her 2 children. He sent money occasionally, irregularly, unpredictably, like weather. And he called Caleb on his birthday every year, a 5-minute call full of enthusiasm and vague promises that Caleb received with the polite detachment of someone who has learned not to want too much from a particular direction. Dorothy had no animosity toward Derek, Or rather, she had laid the animosity down somewhere along the way and chosen not to pick it back up, because carrying it cost more than it was worth. But she would not call him about the cake. She would not give him the opportunity to disappoint her in something this specific. She was still thinking about it on the morning of October 13th, the day of the concert, when she got up, made herself coffee, and stood at the kitchen window watching a cardinal sit in the maple tree for almost a full minute before deciding that wherever it was going was more important than the branch it was sitting on. Caleb came into the kitchen at 7:30, already dressed, his hair still slightly damp from the shower. "Morning," he said. "Morning, baby. Coffee's on. There's oatmeal, if you want it." He made himself oatmeal, and they sat together at the kitchen table, the morning light coming in at a low angle through the window, catching the dust motes suspended above the table in a way that made the ordinary kitchen look briefly like something from a painting. "Tonight's the concert," he said. "It is," she said. "You still want to go?" She looked at him. He was watching her with a steadiness that was beyond his years, that had always been beyond his years, and she felt again the familiar mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride at who he was becoming, sorrow at the things he'd had to carry to get there. "I want to go," she said firmly. "We're going." He nodded and went back to his oatmeal. "Caleb," she said. He looked up. She had been going to say something about the cake. She had been going to say, "I'm working on it, baby. I haven't forgotten." But looking at his face, the composure of it, the careful steadiness, she understood in a flash of clarity that he already knew. He knew there might not be a cake. He had known for days, maybe longer, and he had said nothing, and he would continue to say nothing because he was protecting her. Her 11-year-old grandson was protecting her. She felt something happen in her chest that was not quite tears and not quite not tears. "Nothing," she said, "just making sure the oatmeal's okay." "It's good," he said. "Thank you." She drank her coffee and looked at the cardinal, who was gone. The Montgomery County Fairgrounds sat on the eastern edge of Clarksville, a sprawling, flat expanse of grass and gravel and metal structures that smelled of hay and axle grease even when there was no fair happening. It had been the site of livestock shows and demolition derbies and craft exhibitions, and once, an ill-advised attempt at a music festival in 2011 that had been rained out after 45 minutes. The main stage was a permanent covered platform at the far end of the grounds, with a large open area in front of it that could accommodate several thousand people standing, and a line of portable bleachers on either side for those who preferred to sit. By 6 o'clock in the evening on October 13th, the fairgrounds were already filling up. Dorothy and Caleb walked from the car, parked on a grass lot a quarter-mile away, directed by a volunteer with a reflective vest and a flashlight, and joined the stream of people moving toward the lights and the sound of a warm-up act finishing its last song. The air was crisp and dry, the kind of October air that feels clean and certain, and the sky above them was going from blue to indigo in that particular October way, the stars coming in one by one like they'd been waiting for the right moment. Caleb walked with his hands in the pockets of his gray hoodie, watching everything with the attentive quietness that was his characteristic mode in new situations. Around them moved the full demographics of a small southern city. Older couples in flannel shirts and comfortable shoes, groups of younger men with farm supply store caps and work boots, families with children running ahead and being called back, teenagers in clusters, performing their own indifference to each other, grandmothers in folding lawn chairs they'd brought from home, set up at the exact angle that would give them the best view while remaining maximally convenient to leave. "Good crowd," Dorothy said. "Yeah," Caleb said. They found a spot about 15 rows back from the stage, on the left side. close enough to see the stage clearly, but with enough space around them to stand comfortably. Dorothy had brought a wool blanket, which she spread over her shoulders like a shawl against the evening chill. Marvella found them 7 minutes later, appearing from the crowd with the navigational confidence of someone who has spent 30 years helping people find things in large buildings. "I've been looking everywhere for you two," she said, landing beside Dorothy with a small exhalation of effort. She had brought a thermos of coffee and a Ziploc bag of snickerdoodles, and she distributed both immediately, the way she managed most problems, by offering food. Caleb accepted a snickerdoodle and watched the stage. The warm-up act, a young local singer named Travis Beaumont, maybe 19, with a guitar and more nerves than technique, was wrapping up his set to polite applause. He thanked the crowd twice, said, "God bless Clarksville," with evident sincerity, and walked off to the encouraging hoots of what were presumably his family members in the front row. A brief pause. Roadies crossed the stage, making adjustments. The PA system played a quiet shuffle of classic country instrumentals. The sky finished its transition to full dark, and the stage lights, which had been warm and ambient, shifted to something more focused and directional, casting the platform in a clean white gold. And then Alan Jackson walked out. He walked out alone, ahead of the band, and before he'd reached the microphone, the crowd had already done the thing crowds do when someone they love appears. That collective release. That sound that's part greeting and part relief. 1,000 people exhaling simultaneously into something that becomes a roar. He was 66 years old, and he moved with a slight deliberateness that acknowledged the balance issues without being defined by them. A careful, considered walk. Nothing theatrical about it. The walk of a man who knows exactly where he's going and is simply getting there at his own pace. He was tall, well over 6 feet, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt and the flat-brimmed hat that had been part of his image for 40 years. He reached the microphone, adjusted it slightly, and stood for a moment, just looking out at the crowd. "Clarksville, Tennessee," he said, into the microphone. And the two words produced another wave of sound from the crowd that was entirely disproportionate to their number and entirely appropriate to the feeling behind them. He smiled. A real smile. Not a performance smile. The smile of someone who is exactly where he wants to be. "It's good to be somewhere real," he said. And then the band came in behind him and he started to play. Caleb didn't know most of the songs. He knew Chattahoochee because Owen had described it often enough that it had become familiar by description alone. And when it came on, he recognized it and nodded to himself. He knew "Remember When" in the way you know something you've absorbed through proximity. Dorothy and Earl had played Alan Jackson on Sunday mornings, and the music had been part of the background of his earliest childhood. Present without being specifically noted. The way the smell of a house is present without being specifically noted. But knowing the songs didn't matter much, he found. What mattered was the way the music worked. The way it moved from the stage and into the crowd and into the chest, bypassing the critical faculties and going somewhere more primary. There was something about the voice, specifically. A quality in it that was difficult to name precisely. Not sadness exactly, not nostalgia exactly, but something in the neighborhood of both, something that acknowledged the weight of time and didn't flinch from it. He stood with his hands in his pockets and listened. And for the first time in a week, the thing in his chest that had been tight and compressed and carefully managed loosened slightly. Dorothy was crying. Not dramatically. She was a woman who had mastered the art of crying without making it visible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. A stillness of the face, a slight brightness at the eyes, a single finger brought briefly to the corner of one eye under the guise of adjusting her glasses. But Caleb was specifically looking. and he saw it, and he understood without asking. He moved slightly closer to her without saying anything and let their arms touch, and she reached down and held his hand the way she'd held it when he was small, her warm, rough hand around his, and they stood like that through 3 songs while Marvella drank her coffee and swayed gently beside them. It was during the intermission. Alan Jackson had stepped back for a 15-minute break, the band playing a quiet instrumental while the crew made adjustments, that the moment happened. It happened because of Bobby Garrett. Bobby Garrett was 53, a high school football coach at Clarksville High. And he was the kind of man who filled up a room not with loudness, but with a specific quality of presence. Broad-shouldered and plain-spoken, with the kind of face that had been weathered into trustworthiness by decades of being honest with teenagers. He had coached football for 27 years and knew every family in town the way coaches know families. Completely, because teenagers tell coaches things they don't tell parents, and parents tell coaches things they don't tell each other. He knew the Harrington family. He'd coached Earl Harrington's nephew years ago, and he'd heard about Earl's death. And he'd seen Dorothy at the grocery store enough times over the years to know that things had gotten harder. He found her in the crowd during the intermission, appearing from the direction of the concession stand with 2 cups of hot cider. "Dorothy Harrington," he said, with a warmth that was entirely unrehearsed. He handed her one of the ciders. "You cold? Here." "Bobby Garrett," she said, accepting the cup with the particular grace of someone who knows how to receive something graciously when it's given with the right spirit. "Thank you." He looked down at Caleb, who was standing next to Dorothy with his hands back in his hoodie pocket. "This the grandson I've heard about? The smart one?" "This is Caleb," Dorothy said. "Caleb," Bobby said, extending a hand. "Bobby Garrett. Heard a lot about you, young man." Caleb shook his hand. "Nice to meet you, sir." The 3 of them stood and talked for a few minutes. Bobby asking about school, Caleb answering in the careful, complete sentences that Dorothy had always insisted upon. And then, in the natural way of conversations between adults, the topic drifted, and Caleb drifted with it, his attention moving back toward the stage while Dorothy and Bobby talked behind him. He wasn't trying to listen. He simply could. "His birthday's tomorrow," he heard Dorothy say, her voice lower now. "He'll be 12. "Big day," Bobby said. A pause. "He's a good boy, Bobby." "Better than good." Another pause, and then quieter still. "He hasn't asked me for anything this year." "Not a thing. He knows things are tight, and he didn't ask." Her voice was steady but barely. "He always asks for the same thing, every year. Just a white cake. Because his mother—" She stopped. Bobby waited. "His mother used to make it," she said, which wasn't quite accurate but was the truest version of the story she could tell in that moment. "And he just wants it to be the same as hers. That's all he ever wants. And this year She stopped again. "I haven't told him, but I don't know if I can manage it." The silence between them lasted only a few seconds, but Caleb felt it like a pressure change. Then Bobby said something in a low voice that Caleb couldn't hear, and Dorothy said something back. And then the music started again, and Caleb turned his attention deliberately back to the stage, because some things you're not meant to overhear any further than you already have. He looked at the stage. Alan Jackson had returned. He was adjusting the microphone again, that same deliberate adjustment. And then he looked out at the crowd and said something Caleb didn't catch because the roar of the crowd was too loud. And then the band came in again, and the music started, and everything else receded. Caleb stood and listened and felt the cool October air on his face and the warmth of Dorothy's hand finding his again. And he thought, whatever happens tomorrow, this is already enough. This, right now, is already enough. He meant it. He had always been good at meaning the things he decided to mean. He didn't know yet that the night wasn't finished with him. The concert ended at 9:30 with Remember When, which Alan Jackson played slower than the recorded version, with more space between the notes, and during which Dorothy held Caleb's hand continuously and did not try to hide the fact that she was crying, and Caleb did not try to pretend he didn't see it. When the last chord faded, the crowd held its applause for a long time. The kind of extended ovation that isn't performance, but actual gratitude. The thing you do when someone has given you something real, and you want them to know you received it. Alan Jackson stood at the microphone with his hat in his hand, holding it over his heart, and looked out at the crowd for a long moment before he spoke. "Thank you, Clarksville," he said simply. "This is exactly why I do this." He left the stage. The crowd began to disperse, slowly, in the way crowds disperse after something they don't quite want to end. Caleb, Dorothy, and Marvella moved with the flow of people toward the exits, wrapped in the particular warmth of an experience shared. Marvella was already recapping her favorite moments. "When he did, here in the real world, I almost sat down right on the ground." And Dorothy was nodding, and Caleb was walking with his hands in his pockets, carrying the evening gently, like something that might spill if held too roughly. He almost missed it. He was looking at the ground, watching his own feet on the gravel, when he heard his name. Not Caleb. That wouldn't have stopped him in a crowd of thousands. What he heard was, "Is that the birthday boy?" He looked up. Bobby Garrett was standing a few feet away, and beside him was a man Caleb hadn't seen approaching. A tall man in jeans and a button-down and a flat-brimmed hat, who was looking at him with a calm, direct, genuinely curious expression. Caleb stopped walking. The man extended his hand. "I'm Alan," he said. "Happy birthday, Eve." Caleb shook Alan Jackson's hand. He did it automatically, with the muscle memory of a child who has been taught to shake hands properly. Firm grip. Look them in the eye. Don't drop your arm too fast. And it was only in the second or two of the handshake itself that his brain fully registered what was happening. He was shaking hands with Alan Jackson. Alan Jackson, who had just finished playing to 3,000 people on a stage 50 yards away. Alan Jackson, who was standing on the gravel of the Montgomery County Fairgrounds in the cold dark of October, looking at an 11-year-old boy named Caleb Harrington with the particular attention of someone who has been told something about you and wants to see for themselves if it's true. "Bobby tells me tomorrow's your birthday," Alan said. Caleb nodded. His voice had apparently decided to take a brief vacation. "Yes, sir," he managed. 12? "Yes, sir." Alan looked at him for a moment, then looked at Dorothy, who was standing slightly behind Caleb with one hand on his shoulder, not pushing him forward, just present. "Mrs. Harrington," he said with genuine courtesy, "thank you for coming out tonight." "Thank you for what you gave us," Dorothy said. Her voice was fully composed, which meant she was working hard. Marvella had gone very still beside her, the snickerdoodle bag closed in her hand, watching with the wide-eyed alertness of someone who understands that they are inside a moment worth paying attention to. Alan turned back to Caleb. "Bobby told me a little about you," he said. "Said you're a good student. Plays football?" "Yes, sir. Wide receiver." "Good position." A brief smile. "Your grandfather play?" Caleb blinked. "My grandfather? Earl?" "Bobby mentioned him. Said he was a good man." "He was," Caleb said. And then, surprising himself, "He built all the shelves in my room. By hand." Alan nodded as though this was exactly the right thing to have said about someone. That's a real thing to leave a person. Something you built. "Yes, sir." A brief pause. Around them, the crowd was still dispersing, and people had noticed, you couldn't not notice in a small town, the circle of stillness that forms when someone worth noticing stops to talk. But they were keeping a respectful distance, drawn in by curiosity, but held back by something in the quality of the exchange. Something that said, "This is private. Let it be." "Bobby also told me about the cake," Alan said. The word arrived quietly and changed the temperature of everything. Caleb didn't say anything. He felt Dorothy's hand tighten slightly on his shoulder. "A white cake," Alan continued. "White frosting. One candle. Same as a picture you have of your mother." Caleb looked at the man in front of him, at the face that was 66 years old and had seen enough to know when something mattered and when it didn't, and felt something happen in his chest that he was not prepared for and couldn't have prevented. His eyes stung. He didn't blink, because blinking would have made it worse. "Yes, sir," he said. His voice came out even. He was proud of that. Alan Jackson looked at him for a long moment with the kind of look that doesn't require you to explain yourself. "I grew up in Newnan, Georgia," he said. "Small town, not much money. My daddy worked in an auto shop." He paused. "I know what it means when a thing that doesn't cost much costs everything." Caleb swallowed. "That cake isn't about the cake," Alan said. "You know that." "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "I know. It's about her." "Yes, sir." The stinging in his eyes had become something he was no longer going to be able to manage by sheer will alone. And he understood this with the quiet resignation of someone who has run out of options. He felt the first tear go, involuntarily, tracing a line down his cheek in the cold air. And he left it there because doing anything about it would have required him to acknowledge it. Alan didn't look away. He didn't offer the polite pretense of not noticing. He looked at Caleb with full steadiness, the way adults rarely look at children, as an equal in the territory of grief, which has no age requirement for entry. "She sounds like she was someone worth missing," he said. "I never knew her," Caleb said. He stopped. "I just know what she looks like. In one picture. And how she smiled." "That's enough to miss someone," Alan said simply. And Caleb, who had been managing the door for weeks, let it open. He didn't sob. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet, complete crying of someone who has been holding something for too long and has finally been handed a safe place to set it down. Tears falling steadily, chin steady, no sound except his breath catching once, twice, before evening out. Dorothy's hand moved from his shoulder to his back, a slow circular motion. Marvella had turned slightly away, giving him the privacy of her inattention. Alan Jackson stood in front of him and waited, with the patience of someone who knows that this has its own timing, and that the most useful thing you can do is remain present until it's through. It took maybe 90 seconds. Caleb wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie, took one long breath, and looked back up. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be," Alan said. What happened next was arranged in the following 10 minutes on the gravel of the Montgomery County Fairgrounds, in a conversation between Alan Jackson and Bobby Garrett and Dorothy Harrington, while Caleb stood slightly apart with Marvella, who had poured him the last of the coffee from her thermos and was telling him about the time she'd accidentally driven to Nashville instead of Murfreesboro because she hadn't charged her phone and had refused to ask for directions for philosophical reasons, which was the kind of story she told when she wanted to give someone else in her vicinity room to breathe without making it obvious that was what she was doing. Caleb drank the coffee. It was sweet and still warm, and listened to Marvella, and didn't try to hear what was happening 3 feet away. When Dorothy came back to him, her face was composed in a way that was different from the composed by effort expression he'd grown used to. It was composed by relief. He recognized the distinction. "Ready to go?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." He turned back to Alan Jackson, who was standing with Bobby, and said, with the formal politeness he brought to things that mattered most, "Thank you for the music tonight, sir. It was really good." "Thank you for listening," Alan said. "Happy birthday, Caleb." "Thank you." They shook hands again, and this time Caleb felt the weight of it. The specific gravity of a moment you know, even in the middle of it, you will carry for a long time. Then they turned and walked toward the parking lot, Dorothy's arm around his shoulders, Marvella on the other side talking about something else now. And the fairground lights fell away behind them, and the sky above was fully dark and fully starred, and the air was cold and clean and tasted like October. In the car on the way home, Caleb asked, "What were you talking about with Mr. Garrett and Mr. Jackson?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment, both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. "Nothing for you to worry about," she said. "That's not an answer," he said. She glanced at him sideways, and the corner of her mouth did the thing it did when she was amused and trying not to show it. "We were talking about tomorrow," she said. "About your birthday." "What about it?" "You'll see tomorrow." He looked at her profile for a moment. The white hair and the tired eyes and the mouth that was still almost smiling. And he decided to accept this because he'd been taught by 11 years of living with Dorothy Harrington that when she said "you'll see," she meant it, and there was no point pressing. He turned and looked out the window at the dark Tennessee countryside, the flat fields and the lit farmhouses, the occasional water tower, the radio towers blinking red against the black sky. He fell asleep in the car before they got home, which he hadn't done since he was 6. And Dorothy drove the last 4 miles with the radio off so as not to wake him. And when she pulled into the driveway, she sat for a moment in the parked car, looking at her grandson asleep against the window, his breath fogging slightly in the cooling air, and she said something quietly to the dark interior of the car that wasn't quite a prayer and wasn't quite not one. Something addressed to Earl and also to Lynette. Something about, "Look at him," and "We did okay." Then she woke him gently and took him inside, and he went to bed without asking any more questions, which she thought was one of the kindest things he'd ever done for her. She made a call that night, after he was asleep. She sat at the kitchen table with her phone. The same chair, the same table, the same overhead light, but everything feeling different now. And she made the call and had the conversation. And when it was over, she sat for a while in the particular quality of stillness that follows a decision that was both unexpected and exactly right. Then she took out the blue notebook and opened it to the page with the line that said, "Cake. Find a way." She drew a careful line through it. Not a scribble, not an angry cross-out. A clean, deliberate line, the kind you draw when a thing is done. She closed the notebook and went to bed, and for the first time in weeks, she fell asleep, without the financial calculations running in the background like a program that won't close. The morning of October 14th arrived in the way of a Tennessee autumn morning. Gray at first, then pink at the edges, then slowly and warmly itself. The sun coming over the flat horizon with the unhurried confidence of something that has been doing this for a very long time and sees no reason to rush. Caleb woke up at 7:15, which was late for him. He lay in bed for a moment in that half-state between sleep and full consciousness, looking at the gray light on the ceiling, feeling the particular quality of a birthday morning, that ambient awareness, before anything has happened, that today is specifically itself and no other day. He looked at the shelf. His mother looked back at him, holding her cake, smiling with the eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Hi," he said softly to the photograph. He got up. When Caleb came downstairs, the kitchen smelled like cake. He stopped in the hallway, 3 feet from the kitchen doorway, and stood very still. The smell was specific and unmistakable. the warm vanilla butter sweetness of a cake baking, the particular quality of it that was different from any other kind of cooking. Something in the chemistry of sugar and heat that bypassed every analytical faculty and went straight to something older, something that lived in the body before the mind. He stood in the hallway and breathed it in. Then he walked into the kitchen. Dorothy was at the stove, her back to him, wearing the blue apron with the white hem that she'd owned for as long as he could remember. On the counter, a round cake pan sat cooling on the wire rack, already out of the oven, already done. And beside it were the mixing bowls, the ones with the blue stripe around the rim, dusted with flour, and the hand mixer set aside with a small cloud of powdered sugar still visible on the beaters. The ingredients were on the counter. Real butter, a new bag of flour, a full canister of sugar, vanilla extract, the real kind, in the small brown bottle, baking powder. He didn't know where they had come from. He would understand later, piecing it together with the patience and precision he brought to most things. The conversation on the fairgrounds, the phone call he'd half heard through the wall the night before, the particular way Bobby Garrett had looked at him, the 10-minute conversation he hadn't been party to. He would understand that Alan Jackson had done it not as a gesture of celebrity charity, but as the act of one human being who had listened to a story and decided to respond to it as fully as he could. But in this moment, in the kitchen, on the morning of his 12th birthday, he didn't need to understand any of that. He just needed what was in front of him. Dorothy turned from the stove and saw him standing in the doorway. She was holding a rubber spatula that had a stripe of white frosting on it, which meant the frosting was already made and waiting. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "It needs another 20 minutes to cool before I can frost it," she said finally. Her voice was steady and full and warm. "Then it has to set." "Okay," he said. "So, breakfast first." "I made eggs." "Okay." He came into the kitchen and sat down at the table, and she put a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him with 2 pieces of toast. And she sat across from him with her coffee, and the morning light came in through the window and fell across the table between them, and the cake cooled on the wire rack behind her, and the kitchen smelled like the most specific kind of warmth there is. "Grandma," he said. "Hmm?" He looked at her across the table, across the eggs and the toast and the coffee and the morning, across 11 years of her steady presence, across the distance between what things are and what you wish they were, which she had always been helping him navigate, faithfully and without complaint. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, not just the cake, everything." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's my job," she said. "And I love my job." He smiled. She smiled back. He ate his eggs. She frosted the cake at 9:30, with Caleb watching from the kitchen doorway. He had learned years ago that watching was allowed, but offering to help was not. The cake was hers to make. That was part of what it meant, and he respected the boundary with the seriousness he brought to all rituals. She used a butter knife, the same one she always used, drawing it across the top and sides of the cake in long, even strokes. The frosting was slightly imperfect, the way the frosting in the photograph was slightly imperfect, thicker on one side than the other, with small ridges from where the knife had dragged. She did not correct this. She had stopped correcting it years ago, understanding that the imperfection was part of the point. When she was done, she stepped back and looked at it. "Same as hers," Caleb said softly, from the doorway. "Same as hers," Dorothy confirmed. She put it on the blue ceramic stand, the same one she'd been using since the first time, purchased specifically for this, at a thrift store on Fort Campbell Boulevard for $2.50, and placed it in the center of the kitchen table. Then she went to the drawer where she kept the birthday candles and took out a single white candle. She pressed it into the center of the cake. At noon, Marvella arrived with a small wrapped package. Coloring pencils, a new set, because she'd noticed his old ones were worn down to stubs. And Bobby Garrett stopped by briefly with a handshake and a gift card to the sports store on Madison Street, and a warm clap on the shoulder that communicated more than the gift did. Priya texted a voice message of herself, singing Happy Birthday, that was much better than her Chattahoochee attempt. Owen appeared at the front door at 1 o'clock with a football he'd saved up for, the official NFL kind, and spent 3 hours in the backyard with Caleb throwing roots in the afternoon sun. The day was full in the way good days are full. Not packed or scheduled, but populated with the right things, with warmth and presence, and the easy movement of time that doesn't feel wasted. At 5 o'clock, Dorothy called Caleb in from the yard. She had lit the candle. It was the only light in the kitchen. She had turned off the overhead fixture and closed the blinds. And, in the soft, specific glow of that one small flame, the cake looked exactly like the photograph. Exactly. The slightly uneven frosting, the white on white, the ceramic stand, the single candle burning with the small, wavering certainty of something very modest, doing something very important. Dorothy stood behind it, and Caleb stood in front of it, and the two of them looked at the cake and at each other across the candle flame. "Same as hers," she said softly. The last time she would say it today. Caleb looked at the flame for a moment. He thought of his mother's eyes in the photograph, the way they crinkled when she smiled. He thought of the photograph on the shelf, faded to pastels, soft at the edges. He thought of Alan Jackson standing on the fairground gravel saying, "That's enough to miss someone." He thought of Dorothy saying, "That's my job, and I love my job." He thought of Earl's shelves and the refrigerator that had been running since 1987, and the maple tree in the backyard, and the cardinal that had sat there for a full minute that morning before deciding it had somewhere to be. He thought about all of it, the whole shape of his life so far. And he held the image of the candle flame in his eyes, burning steadily in the still kitchen air. Then he leaned forward and made his wish. He blew out the candle. The smoke rose in a thin, white spiral toward the ceiling. Dorothy began to sing Happy Birthday, her voice low and slightly rough and completely certain. And Caleb stood with his hands at his sides and listened to her sing and watched the smoke from the candle rise and disperse and become part of the air of the room, and he felt something settle in him that he didn't have a precise name for, but that he recognized as a kind of peace. Not the absence of grief, not the end of missing, but something that could hold both of those things inside it, and still have room for the cake, and the kitchen, and the woman singing, and the October light coming through the edges of the closed blinds. Grief and gratitude, living in the same space. He was 12 years old. He was learning that this was what love actually felt like, in its fullest and most honest form. Not the easy warmth of what you have, but the full weight of what you have and what you've lost, held together simultaneously, without choosing one over the other. "Make a good one?" Dorothy asked when she'd finished singing. "The best one," he said. She picked up the knife and cut the first slice. She gave him the piece with the most frosting, the way she always did, and he ate it, standing at the counter in the kitchen with the lights back on, and it tasted like vanilla and butter, and something that didn't have a name in the ingredients list. Something that was made not of flour and sugar, but of intention and memory, and the particular alchemy of one person deciding that another person deserved to have a thing that mattered to them. "Good?" she asked. "Perfect," he said. "Same as always." Jessie. She took her own slice and sat at the table. and he sat across from her, and they ate together in the warmth of the kitchen, the blue ceramic stand between them, the white frosted cake with 2 slices taken from it, the unlit candle now lying beside the stand because she always saved the candle. He'd never asked why, and she'd never explained. But it was part of the ritual, the careful setting aside of the candle after, as though what it had done needed to be preserved. Outside, the maple tree was dropping leaves in the October wind, and somewhere 3 streets over a dog was barking with the enthusiasm of a dog who has found something worth barking at. And the Cumberland River was moving through the city in its ancient, indifferent way, carrying the water of somewhere else towards somewhere else. And the sky above Clarksville, Tennessee, was the precise blue of late afternoon in autumn, the kind of blue that looks like it was chosen specifically for the day. Caleb finished his cake. He looked at the photograph in his mind. He knew it so well by now that he didn't need to be in front of it, could call it up with perfect fidelity. The dark hair pulled back, the eyes that crinkled, the white cake on the blue stand, the single candle mid-flicker, the smile that didn't know it was being photographed. "Mom," he said inside himself, "the way you say things that you have no other address for. I hope it tasted like this." He looked at Dorothy, who was eating her cake and looking at nothing in particular in the middle distance, her expression peaceful and tired and complete. He thought, "I have her. I have this. I have today." And then he thought, with the straightforward certainty of someone who has just understood something that will matter for the rest of his life, "That has always been enough. I just needed to be old enough to know it." Later that evening, after Marvella had gone home and Owen had picked up his football and the plates were washed, and the kitchen was back to itself, Caleb went to his room. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the photograph on the shelf. The evening light was coming in at the low angle that caught the frame and turned the faded colors briefly warmer. The dusty pinks a little more pink, the cream a little more cream, the silver gray of the background a little more silver. His mother looked back at him, holding the cake, smiling with the eyes that crinkled. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said quietly to the photograph in the warm light, "Same as yours." He went to his desk and opened his homework and got to work. And the photograph sat on the shelf above him in the fading evening light. And the house around him hummed with its familiar sounds. The refrigerator, the heating system, the distant traffic on the road outside, and, outside the window, the maple tree stood in the dark, already bare on the lower branches, holding its last red leaves at the top against the coming winter. It was October 14th. He was 12 years old. He had everything he needed. In the weeks that followed, Clarksville moved through autumn the way it always did. The trees going bare, the air gaining its December edge, the holidays approaching with their particular weight of memory and expectation. Dorothy's finances did not transform overnight. The work of that was slow and ongoing, as it always is. But Bobby Garrett connected her with a Veterans Family Assistance Program she hadn't known existed, and the prescription found a lower-cost alternative. And the hot water heater was repaired by a man from Marvella's church who charged $100 less than the first estimate. Alan Jackson finished his small-town tour and returned to his life in Franklin, Tennessee, 15 minutes south of Nashville. He did not speak publicly about Clarksville or about a boy named Caleb Harrington. That was not the kind of man he was. Caleb went back to school on Monday and played wide receiver and read his books and did his homework and came home every day to the house on Birchwood Avenue where Dorothy was, and the photograph was, and the blue ceramic stand waited in the cabinet for the following October. He did not stop missing his mother. You don't stop missing someone you never knew, any more than you stop wondering about a room you've never been allowed to enter. But he carried the missing differently now. Not as a locked door, but as an open window, letting in both the cold and the light, understanding at last that the two can come from the same direction. He kept the unlit candle from his birthday in the top drawer of his desk, next to his colored pencils and a paperclip and a small folded note Priya had passed him in social studies class that said inexplicably, "The Colorado River runs through 7 states," underlined 3 times. He kept it because Dorothy kept hers, and because some things, once they've done what they were made to do, deserve to be preserved. Some things that look small are everything. He knew that now.